This particular yin yoga practice has a physical emphasis on the spine. Postures will include banana pose, half butterfly pose, melting heart pose, and Milky Way pose, which is a supported bridge pose. So you'll either need a couple of yoga blocks, or if you don't have blocks, then a pile of books and maybe a blanket to make the books softer for this supported bridge pose. Blankets and pillows are always handy to have around, and maybe a sandbag for banana pose. The story will be a classic story known as the two arrows, and will begin to define the nature of true joy. We'll start off practice with a little bit of breath work. So take your time and be deliberate in finding a comfortable seat. It can, again, be cross-legged, or it can be something else. Maybe take some time and some patience to think about what a good seated position is for you, because you'll get more benefit and more out of breath work if your seat is something that's accessible for you. And then take some time to root down, bring yourself into the present moment. You do that by noticing your breath and by noticing other things that are going on in the present moment. So you can notice the sounds around you, the temperature of the room, the little aches and pains that might be going on in your body, even your emotional and your mental state. And then continue to focus on your breath. Maybe roll your shoulders up and back and down. Maybe slightly tuck your chin and move your head back so that your ears are kind of more over your shoulders. And the crown of your head is trying to lift up slightly towards the ceiling. Hands, shoulders, arms are comfortable. There's space, there's length in the torso, so that breathing is easy, breathing is natural, breathing is normal. So the inhales feel okay, and the exhales feel okay. Notice if you're breathing through your nose or your mouth. If your nose is stuffy, just continue to breathe through your mouth. But if your nose is open, see if you can seal your lips and comfortably, naturally breathe just through your nose. If that's not working for you, don't worry about it. Just whatever your breath is right now, notice it. And then we'll try what I call a modified form of box breath. And this is meant to generate mental focus and to slow down breathing here. We're going to try to slow the breathing down to almost a 10-second breath, i.e. one breath cycle every 10 seconds. And we just do this through some noticing breath count through the inhales, a pause, an exhale, and a pause. So the way this works is after your next exhale, inhale and fill up your torso, but take 4 seconds to do so. So slow count of 4. So on your inhale, you inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause for a second, so slow count of 1. And then a slow count of 4 on the exhale. So as you exhale, release, relax, and allow things to flow out of your torso for a slow count of 4. Pause for a second at the end of the exhale, and then inhale again for a slow count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, 1, and then exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause for a second, and then inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause for a second, and then exhale for a slow count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause, and just one more round of this. So inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause, and then exhale, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause, and then just gently return to your normal, natural breath for a few rounds of breath. And then after you've done that, we're going to start the yin sequence right away. So the first yin posture right off the bat is banana pose. This is a lateral bend for the spine. So clear your area of props. If you have a weight, like a sandbag, maybe have that handy. If you don't need it, you can do this without it, but maybe this will come in handy, and you'll see in a moment here. So go ahead and lie back, legs extended out long here for the beginning of banana pose. So you're all lined up, legs, torso, head, neck, shoulders, spine, all in kind of a nice comfortable line here. And then if you have a sandbag, place the sandbag on the left hip comfortably. Or maybe you have a bag of beans that you can place here, just some kind of soft weight here. The idea here is we're creating a lateral bend with the body and with the spine, and so we're trying to create a length and a traction along the left side here. And in order to do that effectively, we want to keep the hips flat on the floor, and that's what the sandbag is here for. It's here to remind us to keep the hips on the floor. Otherwise, the hip might lift and it turns more into a forward fold than it does in banana pose. So from here, take your extended legs and start inching them over to the right, just as far as they go until they feel stuck. And then inch your torso to the same side, just as far as it goes. So notice what I'm doing. I'm making this bent shape. I'm making this crescent moon or this banana shape with my torso. And then once you're kind of stuck, maybe let that left hip kind of settle here. This is the beginning of the posture. This is banana pose. So we'll stay here for a few minutes, maybe 3.5 minutes here. We'll stay in banana pose. You can do experiments here. You can extend your arms overhead. You can play around with maybe grabbing the wrist of your left forearm and gently tugging it over with the right hand just to create more traction in the left shoulder and in the left arm here. Same thing with your feet. You can experiment with crossing your feet back and forth, just so that you can feel something. So yoga, particularly yin yoga, is about feeling the physical sensations that are being generated by the shapes of the posture. Here we're creating a lateral bend on the floor, and we're trying to find something somewhere, or maybe you feel something along the whole line, but maybe for some of us we feel it basically running through this left hip here. And if you're not feeling anything, then see if you can inch yourself a little bit farther into this pose. If you're feeling too much, if you're feeling injury or trauma, some kind of harm, real harm, which I'm going to define as real pain, then you want to back yourself off just a little bit here. In other words, this is getting into the mechanics or the principles of a yin practice, of which there are 3. So I'll go through them right about now here. So we're about halfway through banana pose. Maybe I'll start with some fundamental principles of this idea of yin. So in yin, physically, we're trying to exercise connective tissue. We do that most effectively when we place traction on the connective tissue, the joints, the bones, the fascia, the ligaments, and when we can relax the muscle fiber. So we're not trying to exercise the muscles, even though the muscles are getting traction and getting stretched in these postures. We're trying to de-emphasize the yang practice of exercising muscles, and we're trying to emphasize the yin practice of creating gentle traction on connective tissue. So the first thing to do is to create traction, and we do that through these shapes that we create in a yoga practice. So that's called finding our edge. Now, our edge is a place where our body stops and where we start to feel something. And that's going to be different for each one of us, as each one of us has a unique shape, a unique body, a unique manifestation. All our proportions are different. And so you really have to move with feel rather than how it looks to find an appropriate edge. So we'll be here for about 5 more breaths on this side of banana pose. If you're feeling too much, if it's feeling too injurious, come out now. But if it's just feeling a little bit uncomfortable and awkward, but you know you're not hurting yourself, then maybe you cultivate the patience to stay. This is the second principle of yin. So in yin, it's called stillness. Once you have found your shape that fits you, where you're feeling something, then you try to stay. You try to stay for a while. And that requires patience, that requires fortitude, that requires mental focus to do that. This is getting into the mental and emotional parts of this practice. And then the third principle is time. Time is really what does the work in the physical part of practice. It also does the work in the mental part here. But we're pretty much done with this side of banana pose. We've been here for about 3.5 minutes. So when you feel ready, inch yourself back to your center line. You can take your time. This is not a fast-moving practice. So you can be deliberate as you come out. And maybe notice if there's a rebound, if there's some kind of secondary sensations that you're feeling as you come out of banana pose. Take the sandbag off if you're using the sandbag. Put it off to the side for a moment. For counter pose, for banana pose, we'll practice a posture that I call resting eagle pose. So bend your knees, put your feet on the ground, and then take your right thigh, lift it up, and wrap it around your left thigh. So your whole right shin and right foot wrap around the left shin. If some of you are really internally rotated, you might be able to get this right foot behind your left shin. I can't do that, so this is as far as I go. And then extend your arms out to either side, lift them up towards the ceiling, and then cross the right arm underneath the left arm. Cross above the elbows and bend the elbows, wrap the forearms, make eagle arms. Now, if you can't make prayer arms like this, then just see if you can catch your fingers. If you can't catch your fingers, bring your hands to your shoulders here. Find your version of eagle arms here. And you can lift your elbows up towards the ceiling and your hands move towards the wall behind you. If you want to, you can engage and lift your feet up off the floor just a few inches. This is a young counter pose. Just maybe hold for another breath or two. And then gently release the shape. We'll get to the other side of banana pose here. So extend yourself long and straight here. And if you're using the weight to keep your hips flat on the floor, take your sandbag and now it goes on the other side. It rests on the right side. And then start inching and walking your extended legs over to the left. Just as far as they go as till they're stuck. And then lift your torso, start inching your torso over in the same direction. You can start playing around here, experimenting. Extend your arms overhead. If the arm extension is creating nerve pinching or ligament pinching or pain, then you can just kind of put your arms when you need them. But if it helps to increase and create more traction through the right side here, then do that. Head and neck are comfortable here. And then when you find your banana pose, then stay here for a few minutes on this side. Again, you're trying to find your edge. And when you do, it's a place where you're feeling a little bit of something. It doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be something. It can be uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be that uncomfortable. You're just creating traction and trying to maintain it for time. Get in touch with your breath. Soften your muscle fibers. Maybe use your breath to do that. This is a good time to think about the concept of letting go all of the stress and the tension in the body that you don't really need to maintain the shape. And then stay here for a few more minutes. So there was once a great teacher who was teaching her class underneath the shade of a great tree. And so the teacher posed this situation for her students. The teacher said, imagine there was a woman who got shot in the shoulder with an arrow. She said, after you imagine that, think about how that woman would feel. How do you think that woman feel if she got shot in the shoulder with an arrow? And she gave her students some time to think about this for a while and to respond. And then she said, well, what do you think? And the students, after they thought for a while, they replied, it's like, well, we think she would feel pretty bad if she got shot in the shoulder with an arrow. And the teacher looked at them and she said, yes, you are correct. She would feel very bad. She said, now I want you to think about this situation. She said, let's say the woman got shot in the shoulder, same place, with a second arrow. How do you think she would feel? Students thought about this for a few seconds and then replied, well, I think she'd feel a lot worse. She'd feel at least twice as bad about getting shot with a second arrow. And the teacher looked at them and she said, yes, she would feel much worse. And then she began to teach. And she looked at her students and she said, the first arrow is called pain. And that's unchangeable. That's an inherent part of life. Pain. She said the second, there's nothing like anyone can do about that. You're alive, you go through this life, going to experience some sort of pain. She said the second arrow is called suffering. She said suffering is a choice. That's our decision, whether we want to be shot with the second arrow. Because suffering is our reaction to pain. So pain, everyone has to feel. That's part of life. Suffering is how we choose to continue or not to continue to react to that pain, that it is an inherent part of life. So just one more breath here. If you're in pain, then you really need to come out. Hopefully you're not. Hopefully you're just feeling a little bit of traction and slowly inch yourself back to your center line. Notice if you feel any rebound at this side here. Again, if you're using a weight, you can slowly remove the weight. You can do any kind of little wiggling or just lying still to notice the reverberations here. We will do reclined ego as a counter pose on this side too. So when you're ready, gently bend your knees, put your feet on the floor this time. This time, lift your left leg, your left thigh. Wrap your left leg around your right leg. So left thigh is wrapped around the top of the right leg. And again, this is make your version of eagle legs. So this is my best version of eagle legs. And then spread your arms, extend them out to either side, and then sweep them across each other. This time, the left arm underneath the right one. Make your version of eagle arms. So elbows bend and either clasp the shoulders, maybe catch the fingers, or maybe make the eagle prayer hands here. And then lift your elbows slowly up and away. This is a yang counter pose here. So muscles are now engaged. And then you can lift maybe your knees up, lift your feet up off the floor. Just hold resting eagle for maybe one more breath here. And then go ahead and release your arms, release your legs, untangle your legs here. And then when you're ready, slowly roll over to one side, bring yourself up to seated, and come to a seat with legs extended out front. So the next yin posture will be half butterfly pose. You can sit up on a little bit of padding, maybe one or two blankets or a block or pillow or some books. Legs will be extended, and if you have a blanket, you can make a blanket roll if having your legs straight is a little bit too much strain for your legs. Then you can put a blanket underneath one or both knees to keep a slight bend in the knee. So for a half butterfly pose, bend your left knee, lower your left knee out to the left, and then draw your left heel in as far as it goes, till it doesn't go anymore. Now, for some of you, it might not go anymore until when it hits your hip, but for some of us, maybe it stops before it gets there. If the knee is floating, and it feels a little bit achy, you can always put a support underneath that leg to let that knee feel some support here. Again, the right leg can be straight if it's okay being straight. If that's too painful, then put something, I've got a blanket roll under this right leg so that it can keep a micro bend in the leg here. So this is the beginning of half butterfly. This is a light hip opener with an externally rotated hip here. You can stay here with a nice neutral spine, or you can fold forward. When you fold forward, relax your torso and let your spine round. So I like to grow my spine long first, just for a moment, and then tilt forward from my hip socket here. So I'm hinging here as far as it goes, and then when I'm done with that, then I let the rest of my spine and torso just gently round and soften and fold forward here. So this is where we'll be for a few minutes. Now, if you're here and this is all just kind of hanging and not feeling very well, this is where you get support. So you grab your blocks and your pillows here and you stuff them underneath your torso so your torso can actually just lie on here. Some of us, maybe we're okay with our head, neck, and torso just hanging in midair. And if that's your case, then by all means, stay there. Otherwise, I'm going to stay here. This is half butterfly. If the folding forward is too much, just come back to a nice neutral spine. Get the nice light hip opener here. Otherwise, come back to your breath. See if you can soften the muscles in your torso, in your legs, in your hips, so that the traction that you're feeling, the places that feel stuck and tight, can sink more into the connective tissue here. So I like to talk a little bit about the nature of joy. But in order for us to understand what joy is, I'd like to define some other things, including the nature of pain and suffering. Because it's only through the understanding of these other concepts that we can truly begin to kind of get our head around what real joy is, or at least what my definition of joy is. And it's something that goes beyond the superficial experience that we're having here. So before I talk about joy, let's talk about some experiences that happen to all of us. So in the story of the two arrows, the teacher was talking about pain. Pain is the discomfort of life. The things that happen to all of us that create injury or imbalance in our lives that come from an external nature. We maybe didn't really initiate these things, but these things happen to us and they create a lot of grief in our life. That's what we usually define as pain. And the opposite of that, the contrasting polarity of pain, is called pleasure. These things just happen randomly to us during our lives. We experience them. If something happens to us and it makes us feel really good, we label it as pleasure. If something happens to us and we feel that it has harmed us and caused us trauma, we label it as pain. And neither one of these are joy. These are kind of at the top tier of our experience in that they're mostly externally generated and then we just kind of label them depending on how they feel to us, as they make us externally feel better maybe we call it pleasure. Maybe if it externally makes us feel hurt, then it's pain. So we have about another 5 breaths here in half butterfly. So this is a good time to evaluate what you're experiencing right now. Is this posture making you feel pleasure or making you feel pain, or maybe kind of neither? Who knows, right? But if you're feeling pain, it's like, oh yes, I'm definitely hurting myself and creating injury. Then right, that's not a good thing. That's a red flag. You can bring yourself up out of the posture. Otherwise, a couple more breaths here, maybe soften one last time. If you're not feeling much, maybe you're feeling too much comfort, which is maybe a type of pleasure, in which case, go a little deeper until you're at a place where the intensity of the posture creates a more vivid mental focus. But only one more breath here. If you folded forward, plant your hands, use your hands and your arms to slowly lift yourself all the way up. Kind of grow your spine long, so engage your core muscles to really make your torso nice and tall. We'll do a counter twist here just to work out the kinks. Bring your hands behind you slightly, plant them on the floor. Use your arms and your shoulders to grow your spine up nice and long, and then begin to twist over to the right, so away from the bent knee. So we'll come into a nice spinal twist. So the twist starts in the upper torso, moves down through the mid and lower sections of the spine. You can keep your head nice and neutral, but if it's okay with your neck, you can begin to look over that back shoulder and just hold this for a couple more breaths. This is just a little bit of a counter pose here. And then bring yourself back to center. If it feels good, you can do a counter twist to the other side. And then come back. Finally, you can bring this left knee back up, extend it forward, and then work out the stagnation in your hips and your legs. So maybe bob your knees up and down, roll them from side to side, point and flex your feet a few times. And then you can get yourself set up for the other side of half butterfly. It's now the right knee that bends. Lower the right knee out to the right. Maybe you need a blanket roll to keep your left knee bent, or maybe you don't on this side. Maybe you're a little bit asymmetric, and that's perfectly fine. We actually all are here. Notice if you need support for this right knee. Notice where this right heel needs to stop here. You can stay here, nice long spine, or you can turn, kind of face your left leg, and then fold forward again over the left leg for this side of half butterfly pose. And then find your edge in this posture. So find your stopping point. And again, a reminder, you're moving by feel. And you're trying to feel something, but you're not trying to injure yourself. So this is not go until you break. It's just go until you stop here. And there's a big difference here. So we're not going for injurious pain. We're just going for traction. And we label this different things. Maybe the traction feels like pain to us. Maybe it feels like pleasure. Some of us, we get into these postures and it feels really, really good. Even though it's the same posture, it's the same traction. We've given it a different definition. Some people feel pain, others feel pleasure. We're all different here. And then we'll stay here for a couple more minutes on this side. So pleasure and pain are basically what happens to us in life. As we go through life and live our lives, as the story goes, we're going to experience pain. We're going to experience pleasure. These are things that just kind of occur randomly, even though we try to create situations that will cause pleasure and a situation that will cause pain here. There's a layer underneath that also affects us greatly, and those are the reactions to pleasure and pain, and that is happiness and suffering. So the easiest way to think of suffering is often suffering is the augmented response to pain. So we feel pain, we feel really bad about it, and we continue to feel bad about the pain long after the pain is no longer there. When the pain is no longer present, but we're still feeling the pain, that's suffering. Just like when the pleasure is there, we're feeling the pleasure, but long after the pleasure is gone and we're still feeling really good about experiencing that pleasure, we call that happiness. Now, they're not necessarily correlated with pleasure. Happiness is not necessarily correlated with pleasure, and suffering is not necessarily correlated with pain. You can actually correlate each other crossways. We have about a minute here on this side of half butterfly. How can we do that? How can we do that? We can actually experience pleasure. We can actually experience happiness by feeling pain. Think of, you go to your hot and sweaty power yoga class, you work real hard to the point where you're actually hurting and you're injured. But man, are you happy that you got to do your hot and sweaty power yoga practice, because who knows, you might get that hot date on a Friday night. And so that makes you happy. So that's an example of where pain can create happiness. And on the flip side, sometimes pleasure can create suffering. An example of this is, let's say you have a bowl of jelly beans, and let's say you slowly eat one or two jelly beans. Those first two jelly beans, you detect the sweetness and the flavor of the sugar in those jelly beans, and that's a type of pleasure. So you're experiencing pleasure by eating those two jelly beans, and initially that makes you happy. You've experienced pleasure, you're remembering the taste and the pleasure of those two jelly beans. And for a while, there's a certain amount of contentment, of something that would be defined and labeled as happiness. But you decide to continue to eat the jelly beans in the bowl. And there's a lot of jelly beans in the bowls. There's 800 jelly beans in the bowl. And you keep eating them until you eat all 800 of those jelly beans. They're the same jelly beans. Same sweetness, same wonderful flavor, same thing that brought you that initial sense of pleasure. But when you get finished with the 800 jelly beans, now you start to feel it down into your digestive system. And it doesn't feel so good anymore. And so now you're suffering. One more breath here on this side. And then go ahead and bring yourself slowly back up. Bring the right leg up, extend the right leg forward, and then a twist on this side. Oh, I forgot. Maybe go back to the right leg in half butterfly. We'll do the twist. Here, grow up tall through your torso, and then gently twist to the left here. Stay here for a breath or two. Look over your shoulder if it's okay with your neck. If it's not okay with your neck, don't bother looking over your shoulder. Twist from your torso here. And then when you're ready, slowly come back, make a gentle counter twist here. And then come forward, bring that right leg up, extend the right leg forward, point and flex the feet a few times, do a little bit of wiggling to notice the rebound. And then we're moving into a back bend. So we're moving into a back bend for the upper back, known as melting heart pose. So I'll demonstrate melting heart with a few alternatives. And if you have a blanket roll handy, have that handy if you find melting heart to not work, if it's not working for you. Otherwise, have some books or have some yoga blocks handy. At some point, make your way onto hands and knees. When you get there, maybe we'll warm up for this posture by doing a few cat and cows. So hands underneath shoulders, shoulder width apart, knees underneath hips, hip width apart. And then just kind of rock your spine back and forth. So When you come into a nice back bend, this is called cow pose. And then when you reach your spine up towards the ceiling, as you flex your spine, this is cat pose. Maybe just do 2 or 3 cycles here. And then from here, I'll show you the classic version of melting heart. So melting heart is the yin name for puppy dog pose here. So from table, you'll actually walk your arms forward, either shoulder width or slightly wider than shoulder width, and you melt your sternum towards the floor. So the torso is trying to relax and melt. You melt this into a back bend. And then you usually feel this in your shoulders, in your upper torso. That's the point to melting heart, is to create traction here in this area of the body here. And so if this posture is accessible for you, this is where we'll stay for the next few minutes. Otherwise, some alternatives are, if your head and your neck are getting pressed painfully into the floor, take a couple of blocks, place them where your elbows are going to end up. And then now you've created a spacer for your head and your neck. So you can do this posture now with less neck strain, maybe more shoulder strain. You can actually even just bend your elbows, bring your hands behind you. Do this posture this way. If your shoulders are too sensitive for any of this, but you're still wanting to get the traction in the back of your torso, you can take this blanket roll and place it crossways on your yoga mat. Just do a hard opening on a block. So turn yourself over and lay with your shoulder blades pressing into the blanket. Maybe arms out, T position, legs are relaxed here. And then this blanket will create a pressure. If you feel it up underneath your neck, that's too high. If it's down underneath your lumbar, that's too low. So we want it underneath the thoracic spine somewhere, the spine with the ribs coming out of it here, this upper level spine. So this is a nice alternative if melting heart is not going to work for you. Otherwise, continue to get settled into this upper body yin posture here. And take some time here to just notice your breath. And to notice all the details, all the feelings, and that includes your emotions and your mind and your mental state, your thoughts here. As you continue to let your sternum continue to melt towards the floor, as your torso continues to relax here. For another minute and a half here or so. So it might be a good note here that this is a nice posture to practice when you actually have eaten too many jelly beans, because your belly gets to hang freely in the air as your upper back gets the traction of this posture here. A few more breaths here. So the way I'm defining happiness and suffering is these are the psychological reactions to pain and pleasure. And these are optional. These are optional choices. That's what the teacher was trying to get across in her story to the students. So pain is something that's going to happen to all of us. Pleasure is something that's going to happen to all of us. Our reaction, our response, our optional choice is either to cultivate happiness, this kind of positive outlook, or suffering, which is just the mental continuation of the pain here. So maybe 3 more breaths here. And maybe notice what your reaction to this posture is. Maybe you're suffering here. But maybe that's different than pain. As long as you're not. Maybe you are suffering, but you're not actually hurting yourself here. 1 more breath. And then activate your hands and your arms. Use your hands and your arms to press yourself back up onto hands and knees. And then a nice counter pose for this is wide-legged child's pose. Here, so bring your knees about midwidth apart. Maybe your big toes touch, maybe they don't. Let your hips sink back towards your heels. until they stop, and then lower your torso down towards the ground. Now you can have your arms forward, and by the way, if your torso doesn't make it to the ground and that creates too much strain, start putting props underneath your torso so that you have some support. You can also try bringing your arms alongside your torso to let your shoulders droop forward. So they were being pushed back in melting heart pose and puppy dog pose. But now let them just kind of droop forward and soften and relax as a release to puppy dog pose here. This is a counter pose, so we're just here for a few breaths or so, just to kind of notice. It's also, for most of us, this pose is a slight forward fold. For those of you who with extreme range of motion, this is maybe even a back bend here, but for a lot of us normal folks, this is a forward fold. We can feel the counter to that back bend. We're going right into another back bend here, only this time this one is for the low back. So when you're ready, press your hands, use your hands and your arms to lift yourself up. And then the next posture is known as, I call it Milky Way Pose, because you're making this graceful arc, like the arc of stars across a moonless dark sky. That is the arm of our Milky Way. You'll need some props for this. So if you have some yoga props, yoga blocks, these work best. But if you don't have them, then maybe get some books to create height. By the way, you can also put a blanket on top of the books to soften the books if you need them to be a little bit softer. I'll demonstrate this with the yoga blocks though. So make your way onto your back, bend your knees, put your feet on the ground about hip width apart, and then lift your hips up to place some blocks underneath the flat bony part of your back of your pelvic bone, your sacrum here. I'm going to use 2 blocks because I find 2 blocks to be more stable than one. Press your hips up, choose a height with your blocks, either low setting, medium setting, high setting, and then place the blocks underneath your sacrum. I've got them in kind of an inverted V shape because this feels most stable to me, but you can do this with 1 block if that feels stable to you. We're going to be here for a while, so it needs to be something where it feels stable enough where you can release muscle fiber here. Now find your version of this. Arms can just hang out to the side. Knees can stay bent, but the nice thing about this posture is if you straighten your legs, then you create a lot of traction through all this front fascia that runs in front of the hip bone here, the fascia and the connective tissue, the ligaments that run along in the psoas here. This might be too intense. This might be causing harm if the legs are extended. And that's the case, keep the legs bent here. Some of us, this creates too much compression in the low spine. It actually is painful. For some of us, saddle pose is maybe a better posture to practice here. So for saddle pose, make your way onto hands and knees. Sit back on your heels or in between your heels. And then just lower yourself back as far as you go into your version of saddle pose here. And then this still compresses the low back, which is one of the emphases of this supported bridge pose. So choose which one you feel better. And remember, the blocks can be at different settings. It can be at the high setting in the supported bridge Milky Way pose, or they can be at the medium setting here, or even the low setting. Or if you have a soft yoga bolster, you can just put that underneath your torso here. Legs can be bent or legs can be straight. And we'll stay here for a little bit longer than usual. We've already been here almost a couple of minutes, so we'll try to stay here for 3 or so more minutes or so. Now, I've been talking a little bit about what pleasure and what pain is, and a little bit about what happiness and what suffering is. But joy is something altogether different. So in my definition of joy, in our common definitions of joy and happiness, we kind of lump them together. But I'm treating them as two separate entities. Happiness is simply a psychological reaction, a choice, an option that we give to a situation. We usually associate it with pleasure, but it can also be associated, as we think about this, it can also be associated with pain. And same with suffering. We can associate suffering usually with pain, but also with pleasure. With the example of eating too many jelly beans here. Joy, though, joy is kind of an inherent natural state. So joy exists deep within us at all times. And a good practice in life is to figure out how to tap into this state of joy, this state of bliss that always exists. Doesn't matter what the other conditions are going on. Doesn't matter if there's pleasure or pain or happiness or suffering going on. There's also joy underneath it. Now, we're not aware of it because we get caught up and enthralled with the pleasures and the pains of life and with the happiness and the sufferings of life, to the point where we're not aware of the joy. But the joy is always there. And the joy is this natural state that we discover when we pay attention, when we cultivate an awareness, when we find these moments of peace. And it can be elusive, but it doesn't have to be. Most of us humans have experienced joy. All you have to do is go back into your memory files, your own memory, and you can discover these places in your life where you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that it went beyond pleasure, beyond happiness, and it was true joy that you were experiencing. We've all had these experiences, maybe some of us more than others. But we probably all remember that situation where for a moment the clouds cleared, the sky turned blue, the sun shone down, and for at least an instant, we experienced pure joy. So just about one more breath here. When you're ready, bend your knees, bring your feet back to the ground, if you had your legs straight. Now, coming into this yang version, root through your shoulders and your feet, and slowly begin to engage your core to lift your hips up just high enough that you can take whatever prop you're using out. Maybe it was some books, maybe it was a yoga bolster, maybe it was some blocks here, and then lower your hips back gently down to the ground here. So for our counter pose for this, bring your feet wide so they move away from each other. They find the edges of your mat if you're using a mat here. So feet about 2 feet apart. And then gently lower your knees over to one side. Arms are soft and relaxed. Bring them back up to center, and then knees go over to the other side. So this is a gentle windshield wiping effect of your knees here. Maybe do a few cycles. Your own speed, but I would suggest do them slowly. So maybe even pause when your knees go over to one side. Maybe pause for a half a breath. And then slowly move them back up to center and over to the other side here. Just notice the reverberation from Milky Way Pose. Next time your knees get back up to center, feet come back towards each other, and then bring your knees into your chest. Give your knees a nice hug. We'll move into Happy Baby Pose before we move into Shavasana here. So knees come about hip width apart, and then move them in towards your rib cage. Weave your hands and your arms in between your legs and see if you can either find your shins or maybe the bottoms of your feet. And then the next stage is try to point your feet up, bottoms of your feet up towards the ceiling, and then use your arms and hands to press your feet, your shins, your knees towards the ground, just as far as they go, until things stop, until you start feeling the pressure of this pose. And you can just stay here in stillness for a few breaths, or you can try to start rocking gently back and forth, and just noticing how that feels here. So the Sanskrit name for happy baby pose is Ananda Balasana. And Ananda means bliss. Balasana means child's pose. So blissful child is the literal name of this pose. Bliss is another term for joy. Go ahead and release happy baby pose. Maybe give your knees one more hug. And then from here, bring yourself into your final resting pose, known as Shavasana. It can be a traditional version of Shavasana, which is the legs are extended, arms are extended, head is just relaxing on the floor. If this is standard relaxing posture for you, then by all means practice this. If it isn't, if this brings up a lot of just discomfort and instability, then it's not a good Shavasana posture for you, and give yourself permission to do something else. Maybe you have a different restorative posture that you like to practice, and practice that. Maybe you want to sit quietly in meditation. So then do that here. Maybe you need a prop. Maybe you want a pillow underneath your head. Maybe you would like to have your knees bent to kind of flatten out your back so that it's not strained here. So you can put some kind of prop underneath your knees. In other words, take your time to set up this posture. The more supported, safe, secure that you feel in this posture, the more benefit you'll get out of this. This is resting pose, and resting is a critical ingredient in our health, besides just exercise here. Part of this is actively relaxing here. So begin to notice the places of strain in your being, the places of tension here. Maybe it's muscular in nature. Maybe it's mental or emotional in nature. Send your breath there. So if there's something that's very obvious, like maybe a muscle cramp in a leg or something, then you gently breathe into that muscle cramp. Maybe it's a brain cramp. Maybe you have this recursive thought and it just keeps bouncing around in your head. And then send breath to the brain and see if you can soften it. The thought might not go away. You probably won't. You're not trying to fight the thought. You're actually just trying to pay attention to it, to acknowledge its existence, and to let it do what it wants to do. In other words, let your thoughts drift and flow naturally. And continue to relax other places in your body. So if there's a lot of tension in your jaw and your tongue, release that. Soften your eye sockets. Soften your forehead, your temples. Give yourself permission to have nowhere to go, nothing to do. Postpone being a human doing. Give yourself permission to be a human being. Continue to soften. Feet are soft. Legs, hips, torso, rib cage, arms are soft. Kind of slowly getting heavy, and you're melting into the floor. While you're lying here, just noticing your breath, just in a state of being. You can try this mental exercise, this mental visualization. Go back into your memory banks, into your own mind, and remember a time, a moment, your past life, where you were certain that you were experiencing real joy. Think of that. Remember that and think of that situation now. Most importantly, bring back the memory of how you felt internally, How did it feel very deeply inside your being? Remember that feeling. Remember that deep internal feeling. That's the feeling of joy. And as you remember this feeling of joy, start to remove the details of the moment and the situation. So remember that feeling of joy. But remove the place you were at. Remember that feeling of joy. Remove the activity that you were doing. Remember that feeling of joy and remove the people that you were with. Remember the feeling of joy and remove all external details of that moment in time. To simply remember that feeling of joy and to feel that joy whenever you need to feel it. Begin to deepen your breath. You can start to wiggle fingers, wiggle toes. Bring motion back into your hands and into your feet. Maybe start to move your arms and your legs around. You can gently rock your head from side to side. You can make more motion with the rest of your body. When you're feeling ready, gently bend your knees. Roll slowly over onto your side. Stay here for a moment. Stay here long enough to cultivate a deep sense of gratitude for your practice. Maybe a deep sense of joy. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you're here. When you're ready, bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. When you get there, find your ground. Grow up tall through your torso. Bring your hands together at heart center. I'll end practice with an Om. You can either join in or just listen to my voice. The inner light in me honors the inner light in you. Namaste.